remember the questions.
Okay.
Okay. To be honest, I can't remember the questions now. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. When we finished the last talk 2 days ago, which was on the hindrances,
Hmm.
that you were leaving the call a little bit confused, and so you said you had some questions, but it seems that you've resolved those questions on your own.
Perhaps.
Okay. So do you have any new questions?
Sure. Hmm. I'm just trying to think. It's tricky because in the process of anapanasati, um, everything is a process, and basically, if I feel like I'm stuck, I'll know there's wanting. I'll, for example, if the breath becomes too fine, and as to so I can't discern it, then maybe um, maybe I'll start to indulge in hindrances, and then I just restart the the process from the beginning, the long breath, and then it doesn't take as long to build up again. Uh, but yeah, there's also I'm enjoying oh yeah, I'm seeing from experiences earlier in life, uh, of how I did naturally kind of build a nimitta in focus. For example, maybe I don't know how long ago it would have been now, 8, 9 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, I think. I would just before I went to bed, I would close my eyes and just relax without trying to fall asleep, and I would build this nimitta, and I would um, try to reach absorption, and it'd be a very pleasant state. And I'm kind of going back towards that again, but it's not so much pleasant as it is kind of refreshing. Hmm.
Okay. Um, while you were talking, you mentioned about the breath getting very subtle, and that um, there's several things to be said about that. One is that when the mind really is settled down, then it's okay and maybe even appropriate for the breath to get very subtle. But generally, what happens for most people as they're gaining skill is that when the breath gets subtle, the mind gets dull. And so, um, when students talk about getting the mind getting dull, uh, generally they will only recognize the mind getting dull without having also recognizing that the breath got subtle. And so naturally, the way for practicing then is to start again. use that point as sati to wake up,
Mm.
come back and start taking some deeper breaths. That the deeper breath will do you much more value than a very, very subtle breath, even if the mind is ready for that state. That, oh, well, might as well talk about it. The Buddha practiced jhanas before he became, that is a better way of saying it, but he was still dissatisfied. And he was dissatisfied with things in general and also dissatisfied with the jhanas. But for some reason, when young folks hear about the Buddha and start learning about the Dhamma, and I think that this has happened all throughout history because the jhanas are well discussed in the sutras. Many, many qualities about it. But the most important quality is that they're not liberating. And yet, all of the students, we lust for them jhanas.
Mm.
We want to have that stuff. And that the Buddha is recommending that there is a more direct path to freedom than going through the process of building these jhanas, because the best things that the jhanas are going to do is to develop skills that you could have developed easier if you'd have practiced the direct method. That in fact, there's kind of a little joke about that. This, what we mean by the direct method, is actually very early listed in the Satipatthana Sutta, and that the Pali is ekamaga, which means one something or another. Okay, maga is path, one path,
Mm.
but that is translated in many, many different ways. Exactly. Exactly. You just drew it out. The Thai version of that is shortcut. Okay, the direct method or the one-way method is to start where you are, and some people talk about it in the sense of dry and wet. And when we talk about jhanas, we're not making a very, very clear distinction. So, but the Buddha was very, very clear about it, that it's the second is more useful than the third and the fourth, but still it's the first jhana that's liberating. And that's still the jhana where we're doing good breathing, and that we do not shut down the mind and stop thinking, because we've got a lot of thinking and figuring out to do, giving insight. Okay. And so this is much more of the teaching of the Buddha of let's not let's say worry about or try to gather jhana factors until it's the right time to. Now, an example of that would be monks and nuns who have ordained, or Dhamma dudes that have completely cleaned up their life, and that they now have the teachings of the Buddha. And what are you going to do with your time all day? Well, there's these toys called jhanas that you can play with. They're a way of structuring time, and they give what the Buddha calls a pleasant abiding. But when one comes out of these states of jhana, they are now not liberated, that the hindrances come back also. And so basically, actually, there are guys in Burma that I have seen that sit in the, let us call it the sala or the gymnasium for the mind, and they just stay there all the time. One guy just stays there all the time. He lives there. and he doesn't move. He gets up to go to the bathroom, and he gets up to go to eat, and other than that, he's well known that he's just sitting there all the time. And I guess he's been an inspiration to some of the others because he's got a little team going. Okay. But I have not met a student on the internet yet that says, yeah, that's how I want to live my life. And another example of that out of history would be Bodhidharma.
Ah, yeah, facing the wall.
Well, actually, what was the wall was not the wall of a temple, it was the wall of a cave.
Cave. Yeah.
And they've still got the cave. It's all decorated and juiced up there at the Shaolin Monastery. That's quite a place. They've got it all on YouTube and whatnot like that, if you're curious. But it's not the way to practice, but it is a good way to structure your time if you've got absolutely nothing else to do.
Hmm.
But there is no reason for one to practice that stuff without getting what the Buddha actually found out, which was liberation of the mind. Now, in a way, you could say that the liberation of the mind then would be freedom from the hindrances all the time, or at least most of the time, or at least a lot of the time, so that every time we remember, we can come back into a state of non-hindrance. And then the thoughts that we have that are not associated with what we're doing right now, planning, whatnot like that, is very short-lived. An example of that would be going onto the internet and booking a ticket on a boat, and a few things that have to be done in advance, or standing in line at the well, no, standing in line is okay because that gives you opportunity to be here now. But dealing with immigration or at the bank or whatever while we're doing business, there's a lot of time that we would be in states of activities and doing things that in this regard would be considered hindrances. But they're not really big hindrances. They're just getting the business done. Now, really, it would be a hindrance if I was getting that business done and was upset and ticked off with the person that I was doing business with. Then that would become a hindrance of the feelings arising. But the mind will have ordinary kinds of thoughts throughout the day. But the trick is, can we remember, clean that stuff out, and come back to a really pleasant moment here now? And practicing that over and over and over and over and over again, so that we develop that skill of sati, to remember to keep coming back to this present moment, and doing so with that great joy of knowing that this is the right way to live. But that's actually an important quality is for students to actually the reference to it is actually take refuge in the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha. When you recognize that that's your refuge, that's the best place to be. Sometimes we have to go out at sea, but it's better to stay in the harbor. That storms and squalls happen very quickly, they come up. And so it's better just to stay in our refuge or in our harbor. And so there is a certain amount of adventure that is worthwhile doing. But generally, we want to do that only in short spurts so that we can get back to our safety coast, our harbor, that place where it's free from hindrances, and would be then refuge in the Dhamma, refuge in the Buddha. And so we continuously seek that refuge. Don't know that it's available, because there's going to be all kinds of things throughout the day to pull you out of that. If you've got a job or whatnot. Actually, you're quite lucky. You're here in Thailand, right? And you're in Chiang Mai.
Yeah, And I'm on 3 weeks holiday right now, which would have been the case even if coronavirus wasn't a thing. So I've got a lot of free time and not many responsibilities to other things.
Therefore, there's not much things to hinder your mind, and you can keep it. That's good. In fact, I've told several students that the way that I'm putting it is that Mother Earth is using the poetic justice department of the comma machine in the sky to shut things down right now, that so she can take a breather.
Yeah.
That the humans have so polluted Mother Earth that now she's got to pollute the lungs of the humans to get them to ease off for a while so that she can get her air cleaned out. And so, in that regard, all of these people that are sitting at home should be very happy that they've got a time to breathe out. It's only the greedy, only the ones who are worried about money that are having any reason to be upset, and they're still mistaken. That the world is going to get along quite well, and in fact, even if the economy went to half of where it was, we'd still be all better off. That we don't need to have the goal of humanity is a gross national product. In fact, in Bhutan, they have a gross national, how, what do they say it? Gross national happiness, I think, something like that.
Mm.
But uh, the, uh, the, the Prince of Bhutan and the uh, group there. By the way, Bhutan is an independent country, but they let all of their foreign affairs be handled by India, which does a very good job of keeping almost everybody out of Bhutan. They don't give visas to Bhutan easy, and so that helps them maintain that Buddhist culture of going after the gross national happiness is what their aims are, and that you can see that this at least gives humanity an opportunity right now to go in that direction instead. And since you know about it, you know that it's almost now there's nothing else for you to do for the next 3 weeks. That's all there really is worth doing, is just to keep your mind as clean as it can be, staying
Mm.
out of the past, staying in the moment, building joy and spreading that joy to any and everyone that you're around, which right now is not very many, or at least at a distance.
Yeah. Mm.
So um, this is why the Buddha is so up on that issue of the first jhana, is because first jhana main quality is the freedom from the hindrances, those things that cause us mental suffering, the very hindrance that keeps us out of this present moment. So you can see, in fact, in that regard, the teaching of the Buddha about enlightenment winds up being quite simple. Oh, this is all there is to it. Just get myself into a state of good happiness and maintain that, and we become satisfied. Here's actually a way of looking at it. If you had this thing called enlightenment, which is what all of the Western students are craving for, and you had this thing called satisfaction, which is actually not hard to get hold of once we begin to understand what's going on, having satisfaction. Now, we have a dude over here that's enlightened. The question is he satisfied with that enlightenment, or does he want more? As opposed to the guy who's completely satisfied, when he sees enlightenment come by, he says, well, I don't need that. I'm already completely satisfied with what I've got. And so basically what I'm getting at here is that most folks in the West, for reasons of our culture, even if one's not a Christian or not associated with any of the religions, still every kid gets, let us say, uh, a whole bucket full of all of that kind of magic. We've heard it all our lives, all right? And so when we hear about Buddha, we say, oh, well, I know because he comes from that religion over there that he belongs at least on the same shelf as this one of Jesus up here. So we'll put this little statue of Jesus and this little statue of Buddha way up high on the shelf, unreachable even. And so we do that mentally also. But there is a sutta where after the Buddha died, Ananda was out on Pendabat going for alms round and got into a conversation with a Brahmin. Then that conversation got interrupted by his third party who came in, and then after that guy left, then they got back to it. And that the point that the Brahmin was asking basically is, what's the difference now between any of the monks who come in here for Vendabat and the Buddha himself? What's the difference between the monks and the Buddha, especially the monks who were known to have become noble or were known to be arahat or whatnot? And so Ananda's answer to that question is that there's really only one. There's only one thing that distinguishes the Buddha from all of the others, and that was that the Buddha merely found the path, and that most of these guys were out looking for the path before they ran across the Buddha, and so they were all path seekers, and everyone was practicing wrongly because the actual real thing that the Buddha found was actually not that big a deal. It was almost laying in plain sight. There it is, you know. This is all you have to do is stop feeling bad, and then you can feel good. And when you're feeling bad, we'll call those hindrances. And so all you have to do is stay out of the hindrances. And what is there left to do in the spiritual path? That's the hard question, because if it's too simple, then how can I be so full of pride that I've attained something? Because I haven't really attained that much of anything. And so we have this wrong-headed idea that these things are really, really exalted, almost magically so, where in fact, if there's any exaltation there, it's simply because when one has a mind that's unified and whole and happy, he's not going around creating havoc. He's not out there making mess, trying to get something from somebody, or you gin up them, make them angry to get them to vote for him, or out asking them for money for one reason or another. That he's content, and that makes it remarkable that we stop bothering other people because we've also stopped bothering ourselves. And that's exalted, because most people are living at the ordinary level are out there messing with each other's minds all the time. In fact, you could go so far as to say that humanity is nothing but a pack of liars. We lie to ourselves, we lie to each other. We figured out to manipulate the truth, and so that's what we do. I guess it got started way back in storytelling. And so sitting around the campfire, and the young kid asked his uncle about that animal or this animal or that tree or whatever like that, and uncle's got nothing. He's got nothing. And so he makes something up. And then he's really surprised when he finds out the kid believes him. And that's the start of religion. You could go so far as then to say that religion is the first lies. The very first lies that were ever told were religion. That was the dawning of it. And so that's what has happened. In fact, when Buddhism became a religion, was simply because of all of the lies, all the magical thinking, and all of that that got added to the original teaching of the Buddha. which was quite spectacular in its own simplicity. And so this is how we begin to look at it anew, is that, oh, this is a process. It is a procedure. There are skills that must be developed to tame that part of the mind that has remained wild. We're not going to kill it. We're just going to tame it. We're going to actually keep it for good value, especially our fear. When fear comes up, you have to pay attention to it. But only to figure out what the fear comes from. And when you figure out there's nothing to be afraid of, then you can say, okay, down boy, finish, gotcha. And so this is the way that we begin to live our lives free from hindrances. And so we begin to develop the sati so that we can check it out. What am I doing right now? We do a little spot investigation. What condition the mind is in, what condition the gladdening is in, what condition is my attitude in. Am I in the attitude of a winner, or am I the attitude of a loser? Am I hindered? Am I being pulled down by my own thought feeling process? So when we begin to exalt this state, we want to make sure that it's exalted appropriately because of the quality of the mind and also of the quality of the behavior, rather than that that enlightenment is a big deal all on its own, because it's not. It's almost like that in order for people to take refuge in the teachings of Jesus, that the Christian religion had to exalt him, had to make him Son of God. Even when he called himself Son of Man, and we know how we use that word son of, it's just like the qualities of, rather than an actual son, like son of a bitch or son of a gun or whatnot like that. We use the term in that regard. But oh no, the Christians say, no, he's actually the Son of God. And because of that, you can take refuge in him. And so naturally, that kind of mysticism has been floating around in the minds of men. So when they hear about the Buddha, they recognize, oh, he too must be super duper whoopty special. No, not like the Son of God. He's just an ordinary guy. He did have quite a few things going that Jesus didn't. For instance, he came from royal stock. He was really, really well educated. That if he had been in front of Pontius Pilate, they would have been the best of friends. But the Buddha did upset the Brahmins. But he was already friends with all the kings, so the Brahmins, they had nothing to do with him, but they worked at it for centuries until they finally were able to destroy the teachings of the Buddha by poisoning them with magic and turning Buddhism into a religion. And so when Buddhism came to the West, it came as only that religion. And it didn't come in its original noble form, to where when the teachings of the Buddha were spread out in Asia, it was done by monks who were noble. And so there's always been that quality of nobility in Asia, in Thailand, and in Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Burma. I have met nobles from all of those countries. I assume that it's also true with Zen. In fact, I've got my suspicions about a guy in San Francisco. But the problem with Western Buddhism is that it got too quickly messed up with money. And so money and magic are two qualities that are keeping the actual noble teachings of the Buddha obscure to many. And so this teaching that you're getting here is the teaching that is sort of stripped off of all of the magic and stripped off, and I mean all of the magic, even your magic enlightenment and the magic Buddha, they're out too. And also stripping out the quality of the money, because in a way, the Dhamma itself is priceless. If the Dhamma itself is actually priceless, then how can they get away with charging $2,000 for a 10-day retreat? I don't know what they were charging in Thailand. That's a question that I would have. Where were you saying you were about to go to a retreat? Where was it?
Based on Dana.
Dana.
But they, a lot of places do kind of say it's based on Dana, but you can, you can give us a donation. Nudge, nudge. Yeah.
That's kind of looked down on in Thailand because of the Wat. Is this meditation center associated with the Wat? Are monks teaching it, or okay?
Actually, oh, not with the monks. No, the monks don't actually teach it. It was, at least to I think the Thai people, when they go on retreat, they are taught by the monks. But because the monks don't speak English, it's actually a lay person who had a very close relationship with the abbot who taught the instruction.
Okay. Yes, I would expect that. Similar arrangements are here in southern Thailand. I would also go so far as to say that what we have here is under the umbrella of and being supported by Wat Suan Mok, which has donations and contributors from all over Thailand. So they are really easygoing about that. So the question is whether it's charged room and board or whether it's charged for the Dhamma. And I know that that's kind of a place where people can hide. It's kind of a loophole. But Dhamma itself has been historically always freely given. That donations to the Wat or whatever has nothing to do with directly the teachings. That they're always kept kind of separate. Donation box is never mentioned. It's off to the side someplace. And generally, it's the lay people who take care of the donations. They're the ones who care about it anyway. The monks, they don't care.
Yeah, I did watch an interview with Christopher Titmuss, who was under Buddhadasa, and he was telling a story of people giving direct donations, dana, to Buddhadasa, and not saying kopjai or kopkun, just not saying anything at all. And when he asked him why, he said, because it's dana. If I say thank you, I'm giving something back. Yeah.
That's generally practiced at Wat Suan Mok anyway. But since Bhikkhu Buddhadasa generally didn't leave Wat Suan Mok, he probably didn't even pick up the money. I've seen that too, that people have donated to Achan Po, and he just says, leave, if you want to donate, just set it there. And then everybody leaves the room and the money's still sitting there. And so that whole idea then of the money becomes really unimportant. And yet, because of the Western mentality, that the money is the most important thing. And when this is mentioned like on places like Reddit, the Westerners, they just naturally assume, oh, well, of course they're going to charge for it. I mean, everything else does. Why doesn't this too? But that's the way that the Buddha started, is that the Dhamma is to be given freely. which makes it all the more valuable. They do have the idea that you get what you pay for, but
That's magical thinking, right?
that's kind of
Yeah.
magical thinking. That's expecting for the karma machine to actually work. But another way of looking at it is, imagine that you uh, were walking into a hotel for some other reason, thinking that you would go and get a bite to eat later after you finish your business in the hotel. And the maitre d' of the hotel walks up to you and say, "Today we have a huge buffet, but we have no customers. Here, please, I give you free. You come and take and get all the food you want for nothing." Somehow or another, that meal is even more delicious than if you had to pay the price for it. We always love a free meal. And so the Dhamma is like a free meal. It's almost to the point that it builds gratitude because we're grateful for such a valuable thing. But if we paid for it, hit bits and pieces and this time and that time as we go along, then we almost feel like, well, I bought it, it belongs to me. But when it's given as a gift,
Mm.
now we become really grateful for that marvelous gift. We want to share it. In that regard, is also what we refer to as paying forward. It's like a child can never repay his parents for the care and the upbringing that he got, but he pays that forward by giving loving care to his own children as they grow up. And so then they grow up and they pay it forward, keeping one generation after the other, taking care of one another. But that's all fallen apart in the United States. And so they have this vast rest home industry there. They've got a few rest homes here even in Thailand. But in the old days before there were rest homes, they would go to the Wat. And so the Wat was the rest home business of Thailand and still is quite main. Where there are a few rest homes, but not many. Not like in the United States, where there's like 1,000 of them in North Carolina alone. That's just so amazing. So anyway, the Dhamma, if you recognize it as such a marvelous gift that you've been given, then it's natural for us to pay it forward. That's basically why I'm on the internet, is I've got such a valuable gift. And so I'm out here spreading it around. The world really does need this Dhamma. It's that valuable. And so we're looking for a few good men or a few good Dhamma dudes. Or I used the dude the way that it was originally used, in the sense of ladies are invited along. They can be Dhamma dudes also. That the whole point was, in the early part of the 20th century, there were things called dude ranches, where many of the cattle ranches had been converted into resorts. And these were called a dude ranch, and that those on vacation would bring their whole family to a ranch to stay. And so that's how the ranch supported themselves, because they weren't doing it with cattle anymore. That had already gotten consolidated. So in that regard, I think of a dude ranch as a place for dudes, and Dhamma dudes for everybody, as long as they've got the Dhamma. And that is almost like the noble seeds of the Dhamma. So anyone who has made that first step into the teachings of the Buddha would then be considered noble. In fact, the Buddha considers them noble. So I'll give you that now. The first step of Sotapan is when the practitioner knows that no matter how obstructed the mind gets with hindrances, that he can clean that out. Come back to this present moment, be here now, and see the value and the wisdom of the truth of this moment. And then the Buddha says that this state is the first step, it's the first knowledge that is noble, supramundane, which also means transcendent. It's part of the path and is not shared by ordinary people. Ordinary people are victims. This is a winner's position. No matter how obstructed the mind is, I can clean it out. All I have to do is remember to clean it out, and I know how. And so we clean it out. How do we do that? We do it with a deep breath and a big smile and a gladdening. Oh, well, I'm so glad I'm not thinking about her anymore. Or I'm glad I'm not thinking about the bank anymore. And so we just drop it. And we come back to this present moment. And we take that deep breath with the understanding, I'm the winner now. I am no longer a slave to my feelings and my thoughts. I can think what I want to think, and I can feel the way I want to feel. And right now, I choose to feel really good, feel like a winner. And so that's where this piti arises. Feel really good, especially with the quality of deep breathing, because if we're breathing well, then the body gets really energized. And so we want to keep those two things going. We want to maintain this state of having a body that's well energized, both with oxygen through breathing and energized through our attitude, so that we actually become on top of our own world. I like the expression, everyone is an emperor of their own pile of dirt. The question is, are you buried by your pile of dirt? Are you sitting on top of it? Are you on top of your own world? And so the answer to that is, they're buried under it until they remember they don't have to be. And so that's the sati that kicks it off for us to get out from under our pile of dirt and get on top of it, get on top of our world.
It can also similarly tied to the metaphor of the lotus flower too.
Which is?
Born in mud and rises above it.
Mm-hmm. By the way, the lotus flower has an additional quality to it, not just the mud, but even water, or even flowing water. That when the lotus opens, when it comes out of the water,
well, it
and
kind of
flood, there's no little droplets of water there. There's no water. It just came out of the water, opened up, and there's no water. And so the scientists have studied that. It has to do with, it's got something to do with like the little kind of hairs and things like that are on the leaf that is similar to the way that geckos can walk on walls. We've got a lot of them here. We've got one big 2K. And the bathroom's got, at any time we go into the bathroom, there's got to be 4 or 5 geckos in there. They're all on the wall. So that quality of the lotus flower, yeah, but it comes up and it's completely clean. So therefore our mind, that when we shake that stuff out of it, now the mind is clean, it's pure. And it's such a relief. That's the right word for it, is relief. Especially if someone has, let us say that a woman is in a really bad relationship with her husband, that he's constantly yelling at her. And then she has the thought, finally, after she talked to many friends and whatnot like that, she finally comes to the conclusion, I've had enough of this. And immediately after that, she feels relieved because she's finally came to a conclusion, and that she feels really relieved. Now, that conclusion may not be divorce. That conclusion may be, I'm just not going to engage with him. When he's in that state, I'm out of it. I'm going to walk out, take a hike or whatever. And so when we look at it like that, basically, we are the married couple inside of our own mind. There's various places in there that Freud and Byrne have labeled of ego states that get into arguments. When you get to the point of, I've had enough of me, I've had enough of that stuff, that's when it becomes really a relief. And we feel really relieved. Wow, I've decided I'm not going to play that game anymore with myself. I'm just going to quit. And so this is how we begin to feel really strong, because we're taking control of our own lives. We're feeling the way that we want to feel, because we can be free from these hindrances. And so that leads us then into the next thing about, let's start looking at the distinction between what kind of thoughts are worth having and what kind of thoughts are not worth having. Well, there's a kind of an intermediate thought that's worth having, simply because we're taking care of business, taking care of the requisite, so to speak. Sometimes, for instance, if there's a little local story, when the termites eat through the floor and there's a hole in the floor, sometimes it's a better idea to just fix that floorboard, and taking the time and the effort and tools and whatnot to fix the floor. So that kind of job doing can either be done with a mind that is free and satisfied, or it's a job that can be done full of frustration. So the job itself has really nothing to do with this meditation practice. Think about it like this, like a square or like a cross. It's got 4 quadrants to it. And on one side, on the left side, would be doing it, and on the right side would be not doing it. So we have a choice. Are we going to fix that floor? Or if we're out at tooling around in the car and we have a flat tire, am I going to fix that flat tire, or am I not going to fix the flat tire? Am I going to fix that floorboard or not fix the floorboard? So that's the question. But then there's the other side of the question is, how am I going to feel about it if I don't fix the floorboard? And how am I going to feel about it if I do fix the floorboard? So we begin to recognize that the way that we feel has really nothing to do with the job at hand. I can fix that floorboard and feel really miserable. Or I can not fix that floorboard and step through that hole and then feel miserable. Or I can fix the floorboard happily, knowing that I'm making the house safe. And then every time I step on that floorboard after it's been fixed, and I get that joy of, I fixed that thing. Okay. So now we're beginning to understand that what we do, the behaviors that we engage in, is actually distinct from this internal mess that we have, that we can learn to whistle while we work, that we can enjoy it. And yet most people have jobs that they don't enjoy. Why is that?
Well, I mean, I threw myself into a new occupation of teaching when I came to Thailand. It was my first time teaching, and I found that many of the teachers were quite miserable. And although I did find it quite difficult, just from feeling things through, and actually it was so interconnected with the Dhamma, that the more I paid attention to the present moment, the easier everything became. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me ask you this: what age kids or what age group are you teaching?
From 5 to 9, although next year will be from 5 to 8. Oh, sorry, 5 to 10, but next year is 5 to 8.
Oh, wow, I would say you're really, really lucky, because that's the age where kids really still like to play.
Yeah.
And so you can play with them and teach them English while you're playing with them.
Mm.
One
Yeah.
of one of the things you can do, for instance, is sort of walk around the room pointing at things to see if the kids know the English word for it and make
It gets
a game.
trickier. It gets trickier than that because I don't teach English. I teach maths in English. So it can be quite difficult to keep the lesson entertaining, but I found I don't need to make it entertaining just as long as my if I am enjoying myself and having a positive attitude, it rubs off on the children
Right.
and the children engage with what you're teaching them. And it's and even if you break it down to what's important to what you teach kids in school, I was thinking about this. School is just to give kids a sense of purpose, I think. It's not to get them smart in terms of true intelligence or wisdom being the ability to see through phenomena.
Hmm.
Um, so what you're doing is giving them a sense of purpose, and then they can pay attention to whatever that is.
Okay. Nowadays, writing is not nearly as important because we've all got keyboards.
Yeah,
But reading is a skill that's difficult to learn, difficult to train the mind in. And so getting the kids training in uh, reading skills is difficult, especially when they're young, doing it with a second language.
mm,
Math is also a bit difficult. And in fact, math is teaching the kids how to think logically.
yeah,
But somehow or another, those two skills that most need to be taught um, is basically about all that needs to be taught, should be all that's taught, and let the kids decide what else they want to learn. That
yeah,
let them have their own kind of purpose. They're experimenting more and more with that in computer labs. To just let the kids go into the lab and have a teacher or whatever to guide them through whatever topics that the kids are interested in. They can generally pick it off the list. But yeah, so long as in the math that you engage with the kids, um, call them out. Uh, a lot of math teachers will stand at the blackboard with their heads so deeply in the math that they forget that they've got a classroom full of kids. And so, um, whenever you're doing that, at each step of the way, engage the kids with it, keep them engaged, then they'll learn the math a whole lot better. So, anyway,
yeah,
back to
yeah.
this point that we were making that you just gave a really clear example of that you can go and teach math to Thai kids and be miserable at it.
Yeah.
Or you can go and teach Thai kids math and be very happy about what you're doing, what we're doing, even dishwashing. You can enjoy
Mm,
dishwashing.
yeah.
So, whatever the mind or whatever the hands find us to do, the Bible says, do it with all that might. Do it with all thy might. What we would say instead was, enjoy what you're doing, which would be doing it. Uh, but when we say do it with all the might, normally that means get yourself as frustrated and uptight as you possibly can be over what you're doing, rather than doing it joyfully. And so uh, this is the right way of doing it, which means in many cases, we have to remember to enjoy what we're doing. That's what the value of sati is to get your mind fit for work so that you can enjoy whatever work there is to do. This is one's right way of living, not some exalted sitting in front of a wall for 9 years or whatever. That's not actually the most helpful. What would have happened after 9 years if 9 years worth of kids who had not gotten their math lessons, ganged up on Bodhidharma because he wasn't doing his job teaching English. Just sitting in the wall, and the kids are in the cave waiting for his lessons, and he doesn't give them any. And so, in that regard, we can say, wait a minute, there is a more friendly way to do this. That seclusion has its value, but it has its limits also. And so, learning to do whatever we're doing joyfully then makes life much easier. And so, this is basically what the practice is. And that you could see that it could go so far that people say, wait a minute, my well being and my happiness is so important that the job that I used to be doing is no longer so important anymore. One of the places that this is actually quite interesting is that the Buddha recommends for the householders who really understand the Dhamma is for them to stop being the boss and stop being the householder himself and give all of those duties to his wife. And so you're the boss here. And so that's the way that I live here is I've got no duties because she's the boss. And sometimes it takes a bit of, let us say, searching the old noggin to figure out, yeah, she's still the boss, even in this case. I may be right, but we're going to do it
That's
her way.
very interesting because I know it is backwards in this country from the Western perspective, because in the Western perspective, it's that the dad is the one who tells the kids off, and the mother is the loving one. And from just talking with Thai people, it seems like in this country, it's the mother you need to be scared of, and it's the dad who's kind of all laughing, all joking.
Well, you can see that the Sangha then has had its way, the
Mm.
Buddha Sangha of monks, because men don't stay monks their whole lives, but that normally they become a monk a young man, and that they become a monk at the local village where they already know the monks from childhood. And so now they go into the temple and they learn how to be good monks. And if they do it for a couple of years or so, which was the older tradition 50 years ago or more, now is probably 70 years ago, where the young boy would stay a monk for 2 years. That could either be 18 or 20. Normally, they do the military first at 18 to 20 because they've got, I think that they still have a draft in Thailand, but they only want this many, and so they have a lottery in each district. But you can pay to not have your lottery number in that lottery bowl.
Mm.
Okay, so in that regard, um, generally the age of 20 is when a man will fully ordain. And so at the age from 20 to 22, he'll be a monk. And that then while he's a monk, mom is out in the community looking for a wife for her son, while the young women's mothers are out looking for moms who have a son who's a monk. And why is that? Because they know, the whole Thai community, the society knows that if a young man has been a monk for a couple of years, he's unlikely to be a gambler, he's unlikely to be a drunkard, he's unlikely to abandon his kids or his family, that he's unlikely to do all of the kinds of things that are the major cause of family conflicts in the United States and in the West. And so um, in also in that regard, there's that feminine quality that's opened up in the young man. So after he um, disrobes, or actually at the Katen ceremony, which is normally at the end of the rain season, There, the two moms are sitting with the daughter, ready to introduce. And normally it's part of the extended family. What I'm saying is, yes, there is an arranged marriage system here that's done through the grandmothers, and that this is the natural outcome is that this is a matriarchal society. You just pointed that out. Yeah, the moms are the boss here. And that is so strange for Westerners who come and marry a Thai girl who's all meek and mild and everything accepted in the family, except that the young Westerner doesn't understand that if he's joining a Thai family, he's got to join it the way that a Thai man would, and he's got to fit in that way. He is not going to be the boss there. He may be the money bags, but he's not going to be the boss. That this is a matriarchal society. Well, see, I was smart enough to have figured that out from the sutras and through observation, so I'm really using that. That's really a great advantage because now I don't have to do anything. And the family will wind up taking care of it. And Tam can mobilize the family. She's now the family matriarch. And she likes that role very much. She feels very comfortable at that. She's a natural matriarch, but when she's got uh, not a rich man, but enough money behind her that it puts her in the position of, we've got a nice house here. We've got her sister just went back to Bangkok. We've got two cousins. We've got a nephew. It's a big house and we've got room for them. And she's also loaning money to members of the family, which gives her quite a lot of power. Having regular parties, that kind of stuff. So she's actually doing the various things then that put her in that position of being a family matriarch. But if I wanted to do that, I wouldn't have a chance. Not a chance. No, but she can do it. Okay. So and I give it to her. Let her go. All right. So this it's funny that you were here in Thailand and you've already noticed that this is a matriarchal society. Quite different from the patriarchal society, and it has to do with the influence of Buddhism on Thailand. And there's a lot of really marvelous stuff here. But let's not talk about Thailand. Let's talk about instead that there comes a time when we want to, in fact, not do the things that we used to do. That we're looking more and more for having just an easy life. And so that's why the Buddha intended or built the Sangha, was for those people who just want to, not live in that society anymore and join a happy, easygoing group of guys and just hang out. When I was in the United States as a monk, oftentimes, especially Catholics, knowing about the Christian monks, they would say, well, what do you do all day? And I would say, we do lunch.
You do much?
Lunch.
Lunch.
Yeah, we do lunch. At some places we do breakfast, but you see Christian monks at the various monasteries, they have bells that go off all day. They have, you got to work at this period. You got to pray at this period. You got to go do this at that time. And they're all marching around and doing all of the duties kind of in groups, so that when one monk is in the workshop, they're all in the workshop, or many of it. The workshop is got workers in it. At Wasso and Moke, there's a workshop, but you don't find anybody there. There's no work to do. In fact, it's really hard to find any of the monks anywhere because they're not out there working much. Not much to do. Some monks will go to morning chants, other monks will go to evening chants, but mostly at Wat Suan Mo, none of the monks go to any of the chanting. There's no duties during the day other than mealtime, which is a communal thing. But I also know of some monks who would go to the back door of the kitchen, almost arranged that way. Every morning they would go to the back door of the kitchen and they would be handed a bag or something, or maybe their bowl would get full, and then they would go back to their kuti. And about the only contact they would have day in and day out would be one person that they would get friends with at the kitchen, and that's their only contact. Yeah, all the rest of the time they were alone. I know because I had a teacher who was like that. That in fact Achan Po told me to watch for him and then follow him back to his kuti. And so that's how I got involved with Achan Lee, who spoke very good English. He was Malaysian, but he was staying there at Wat Suan Mok. Before that, he'd been living in a cave, but his health was not good, so he was brought. He was helped to get to Wat Suan Mok.
Is that the same Ajahn Lee
No,
who worked as a, I was going to say, yeah, I was going to say he worked as a pharmacist in Bangkok, but no.
no, not a chance. No, they're common name.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, Sinisero had a teacher by the name of Lee Dhammarato, but this was not him. No, this is one that I knew. That very few other people knew about him, and I only knew about him because Achan Po. They probably had already. Achan Po had already probably spoken to him about me, so that I was actually welcomed when I followed him. Actually, when following him, it's difficult. There is let us say, a section or a group of kutis at Wat Suan Mok that are off the beaten path. And how that happens is there's a point where the path stays on this side of the creek, but it goes right down to the creek's edge and then goes up an embankment after that. And so it just looks like the path just got close to the creek and go on. But oh no, on the other side of the creek are a set of bushes. But if you walk around them, you will find that in other words, this part of the path is invisible from this side of the creek. But if you cross the creek, then you can see where the path starts on the other side. And I was quite surprised about that, but I recognized, oh no, now I know where the old crowd stays. When they disappear, this is where they're going. I've also heard that that's the same thing with Samedo right now. That nobody quite knows where he is. He's somewhere in the vicinity of Wat Papong, Idu Don Rachasima. But when Westerners go to seek him out, they have a whole lot of trouble finding him. The monks will say, oh, well, he went to this wat or he went to that wat. And in fact, nobody quite knows where Samedo is until Ajahn Samedo wants to come out. And so that level of solitude is built into the fabric of some of these forest temples. Is there places to go that are not a really well beaten path, so that people who are foreigners or Westerners who come, they can't find their way through there. So what I'm getting at here is that there comes a time when we do want to have that seclusion, to get away from it all. All the traditions have that. In fact, in the Tibetan tradition, they normally set 3 years aside so that the guy can go up into a hut and stay there for 3 years or more. Also in Thailand, there's a distinction between what we would call the forest wat and the city wat. Hopefully, or the better way of doing it would be that the young monks go to the forest wat for training. And then after they've got a certain amount of training so that they can handle the city wat, that then they can come back into the city wat. But then they don't stay. They're only there for a few years and then they go back to the forest. So you'll find this moving in and out. But generally that breaks down when mommies want their young men at the wat closest to where, so mommy can see him out every day. And so that kind of thing interferes with him being able to go right away to the forest to stay. So Wat Suan Mok is definitely set up to be a forest monastery. If you have a chance to get down here, it would be great. Otherwise, do a Google search, or I'll send you a link.
I did want to mention it because it's quite far in the future, and I'm trying to stay as much in the present as possible. But since you brought it up, I did always consider ordaining, and however, there was never really. I did ask when I went to stay at Throstle Hall, this Zen monastery, very respected Zen monastery in the UK. I asked, and to be honest, I said, what's more important, to love without having experienced love, or to ordain? And I think my answer was, that love is very important to experience. So I kind of stopped my seeking out for that for a while. But my girlfriend is going to be she's very unhappy with her job, and she wants to be a teacher. So she's planning to go to China to learn Chinese, and then come back to Thailand and teach Chinese. But she said that will take 4 years.
I don't understand why, when English is just as important as Chinese. In fact, Chinese is but there's actually a law against teaching Chinese in Thailand. Nobody pays much attention to it.
Oh, she said at the university level.
Okay. That's interesting. I would think that. By the way, where is she now?
Today she's quitting her job that she currently has at a car dealership as an accountant. And her family is very worried about the coronavirus situation, so she's going back home. I'm going to stay here and enjoy the practice. I was invited to go out into the countryside. But
where is her home?
North. It's a small town north. Sorry?
Thailand?
It's very close to Chiang Mai. Yeah, she's Thai.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. I had gotten confused for a moment. I was thinking that she was Western, and so if she's Thai, the first question is, does she already speak Chinese?
Some.
Okay. All right. For a Thai person, that makes a whole lot more sense than it does for a Westerner to go learn Chinese in China so that she could teach Chinese in Thailand. That doesn't make sense. So, but if she's Thai, then that makes more sense, especially since things have changed over time. The relationship between China and Thailand has changed. The, the basically the problems came in the 1840 to 1880 time frame during the Opium Wars, when there was a mass invasion of Chinese people into Malaysia, Thailand, all over the place. Singapore. That's why there's so many Chinese in Singapore, is because of the same reason that the Chinese in Thailand. In Bangkok that there is areas that are pretty close to uh, the big park there. It's Ban Ma and the Royal Palace and Sanam Luang and all of that area. And then on the other side of Van Tai is where Chinatown starts, where there's also a lot of gold shops. And the whole, it's almost like Las Vegas in Bangkok, except that all the signs are in Chinese. So there's a huge amount. And at that time is when the rules were passed so that they could not open any Chinese schools for the Chinese people to teach their children Chinese, but they wanted them to learn Thai, and so that's why that's there. Even as much as even 20 years ago, there was English language newspapers, English language radio stations, but there were no Chinese radio stations and no Chinese newspapers. Now, when I say 20 years ago, that's actually probably 20, 30, probably 35 years ago. But in any case, times have really changed.
Mm.
China's really, really big. You know that China wants to put a railroad to Singapore, and someplace in Thailand, that rail has to be on Thai soil. And that's why there's no train going to Singapore from China, because the Thais will not allow them to build a railroad. So there's that kind of issue with China, where the Japanese are much more here. Japanese have been in Thailand for a long. That's why there's Honda, there's Toyota, there's a lot of different Japanese automotive and electronic facilities and things like that. Did you know that most of the hard drives in the world were manufactured here in Thailand?
No.
No. Yes. Seagate, IBM, uh, um, uh, uh, Huawei. Oh, what do no, I forgot the name of the Japanese word. Hitachi. That's the word that I'm looking for. Hitachi was the one that got Thailand interested, but now Thailand is doing such a good job of hard drives that they make them for almost all of the various name brands. But that got started to Japan, and Samsung does quite a lot of the parts manufacturing for that hard drive. So Thailand has a much closer relationship. It's been spotty with China all along, but they recognize that they're going to have to begin to pay more attention to what the Chinese want. So anyway, good luck for your girlfriend with teaching Chinese in Thailand. So back to what we were talking about before then, and that is that here's a way of looking at it. We have the four requisites. And the Buddha talks about that these are the requisites that we need, because without those requisites, there will be suffering. But once we come to the point of having no problems with getting the requisites, now we're good to go. So now all the work has to be done in getting the mind straightened out. So the requisites are being adequate clothing, adequate housing, adequate food, and adequate medical attention. Once we have those four basic things, and we recognize that's all that we need, we can do it in two ways. One is recognizing that, the stronger the mind is, the better we're practicing, then that means that those standards for the requisites begins to lower down. At one point, my requisite was I needed a palace to live in. Now I'm down to a 10-bedroom mansion. And I'm on the way to going and moving into the sala out of the gazebo in the yard. Okay. And eventually I've got my eye on that tree out in the woods. Okay, so this is the kind of way that we begin to look at it is that we're going to intentionally lower our standards so that what our baseline used to be is now a luxury. And that we're, got strong mind, tough mind. And so we don't need that palace. We don't need the 10-bedroom mansion. We can get along quite well without it. Well, if I can get along without that 10-bedroom mansion, then I can also get along without the job that I needed to do that supported that 10-bedroom mansion. And so our time becomes more free as we begin to free up our time. And one of the ways that we have as time structuring is to clean up the messes that we're making. So if we stop making messes, then there comes to be less and less to do. And so the time structuring, we begin to, so eventually then the Dhamma dude will have enough time on his hands with nothing to do. That's the time to play and experiment with the higher jhanas. Right now, all we need is that first jhana. And so we can get that with our normal living from time to time, and then it gets better and better, and it gets a firmer and firmer first jhana, while the attributes of the first jhana improve, so that that feeling of being a lion really, really sets in. That you begin to have the right noble attitude, that you can handle anything. You begin to have also the sati of remembering to have that frame of mind often. You begin to have joy. We're also breathing well. So generally the body is fairly healthy. So, a lot of problems people have with breathing when they become afraid, they shut down. The mind goes dull. They can't do their job in the afternoons at work because their lungs are collapsed. But here, because we know how to get the body up and running, we recognize that, oh, yeah, but let's find something useful to do with it that is worthwhile and beneficial. We go all again for the wholesome. In that regard, then, teaching the Dhamma and spreading the Dhamma is one of the things that is worthwhile with our time. Making widgets may not be or selling cars may not be a good value of our time, but spending our hours with 9-year-olds teaching them math, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Well, it is the more I pay attention to the Dhamma.
Okay, so this quality of the first jhana, this part of the conversation didn't come from the Buddha. They have this frame of reference about dry and wet without really defining what it is. And in fact, they have various definitions. An example of it would be that when Buddhadasa thinks that rebirth, life after life, and the 3-lifetime version of Paticca Samuppada in the Visuddhimagga, the Burmese look at him and they say, that just means that he's a dry meditator. He hasn't been a wet meditator, because if he was wet, then he would have already had past life experiences. Okay, so that's one definition of the word wet. Another definition of the word wet would be, oh, well, he's got joy. And that a lot of students, especially along the lines with the Mahasi method, is that they want to practice what they're calling vipassana or dry insight meditation because they haven't reached any jhana state. That the first jhana would be considered wet. And that's the way that the Buddha taught is let's get the mind fit for work. And then we'll put it to work in the right place. In that regard, then the wet and the dry would be thinking about mulling over, figuring out what dukkha is when the mind is already full of dukkha in the sense of the hindrances. But getting the mind free from hindrances and getting the mind fit for work in the sense of getting the breathing going, getting the mind charged up, and the mind is free from hindrance, now we can actually investigate the nature of suffering. What is suffering? What is it to be like to be free from suffering? And so in that regard, mulling over the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Noble Path, okay, you like, and so, but the Buddha recommends, no, this is actually the third knowledge. That the first knowledge is getting the mind so that no matter how obstructed it is, we can clean it out and come to this present moment. The second knowledge would be then the knowledge of the first jhana, which getting the mind settled down and getting it really fit for work, as Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about it. And then the third knowledge is the investigation of the Four Noble Truths to its deepest level, in the sense of through the second noble truth, down through the aggregates, into paticca samuppada, as well as understanding what it's like to be free from that. So that the third knowledge then is figuring out what the real path is. And the outcome of that then is the middle position between the path of Sotapan and the fruit. Because now then the next step, the fourth one, is the beginning of the fruit of Sotapan, is where we're really dedicated to be free from suffering. Why? Because the fruit is we're beginning to get really free from suffering, because that's really now the intention. So the question is about this wet and dry thing. If the student is trying to gain the third knowledge without getting the first two knowledges, it's going to be slow and reckless. But if they do get up to the first jhana, which has that quality of the can-do attitude, the quality of the right attitude, the quality of this feels really good and I'm satisfied with what we're doing, then having that quality of the second knowledge then makes the third knowledge possible. And part of that third knowledge then is the dropping of the first three fetters. We'll talk more about this next time. This is where we'll kind of leave it for today, of understanding that as a review, you've got a choice about how you feel. Now that you're practicing to get yourself into a good state, you can recognize that, oh, I can feel good no matter what I'm doing. And if what I'm doing is not making me feel good, now I have to look at, can I make myself feel good while I'm doing this, or do I have to stop doing it in order to feel good? But there's always that feel good versus doing it or not doing it that is basically you taking power over your life. You may have to do this job, but at least you can like doing it. That's your choice, is how you feel about what you're doing. Sometimes we don't have any choice at all about what we've got to do. But we do have choice about how we feel about it. And so that's the big lesson for today, is to recognize you do have your choices, and as you do, you're getting the mind more and more fit for work, so that you can really begin to understand what the Buddha's actual teachings are. That this cannot be by dry amusement or reading books. that the actual Dhamma has to be done in this state of first jhana. Because Buddhadasa talks about it that way, and so does the Buddha. And that neither one of them use the term of wet or dry, because that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because some of them think that, oh, well, wet means you have to have a really high jhana, where others will define it, no, wet means that you've got joy. Dry jhana means that you're unhappy, unsafe, unwholesome, unwelcome, but you're going to do meditation anyway, hoping for an insight or two. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. So the whole quality of wet and dry doesn't make any sense. What makes sense is, can you get yourself in your mind into a state that's fit for work?
In audio engineering, there's a term called wet/dry, and it's a little knob that you can go from fully dry to fully wet.
And
And
what does
you can go in the middle of it. It puts on some kind of processing effect onto an originated sound.
Okay. It may have the quality of either adding or subtractive overtones.
Yeah.
So that it makes a one particular note more rich or more wet by adding more overtones to it. You know about overtones? If you're a sound engineer, I hope you do.
I'm not a sound engineer, but I do know a few things about audio.
Okay. So I'm not sure what that knob means there, but we're also not sure of what the wet dry term means in Buddhism, because it's got various uses. But it's not really appropriate if we're not using it in the sense of it's not appropriate to practice dry, that you have to actually get that joy from gladdening the mind and bringing it up to a state of satisfaction.
I brought that up because you can put it in the middle. That's why I brought that up. If that relates to the idea of the middle path.
Well, without even having a good proper definition of what is wet and what is dry, that's just, ignorance both for the sound engineer and for the Buddhist. That if we don't know what wet and dry means, then at least in the sound engineering, we can play with it, so that we can find the place that's interesting and likable. But within Buddhism, that term came later. That's not a word that the Buddha used, or if he had, we probably would have a very clear definition of what it means. But the guess would be that there's joy, and that dry means that there's no joy, and that if the mind has no joy, then it would be unfit for work, and the meditator is wasting his time. That he needs to get that joy from the first jhana, because that's where the actual work and research needs to be done. But if we go to second jhana, now the mind is too still, too quiet to be able to do that very work that we're talking about. And that's to get fully involved with how the mind works, begin to really see what's going on. That takes some reflection and sometimes internal dialogue and communication and a few ahas here and there and that kind of stuff. And so this is why the Buddha has that eureka moment when he's crawling out of the creek that he was in, with the thought that if I am so weak that I can't even get out of the creek, how can I get to this goal of enlightenment? And it was at that time, maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, it's just right there in the sutta. The next thing is when he recognized that it's that first jhana. And that he says, I recollect while sitting under the rose apple tree. And he was still at home, so we don't know what age he was, but they generally think that he was 12 to 14 when he was already practicing First Jhana. Well, if he was practicing First Jhana at the age of 14, that means he had a teacher. Well, guess what? We know the teacher's name. And we know that teacher then, when he left the palace, went with him. And he was one of the 5 that was there who had, after this point, they saw that he was getting fat, that he no longer was practicing those austerities, and they left. At that time, he was in Bodh Gaya, and they went to Deer Park, which was quite a ways away, maybe 30 miles or so. So we'll talk about that kind of stuff at another time, the turning of the wheel of the Dhamma. But getting back to that point about that while he was under the rose apple tree, he experienced the first jhana for the first time. Naturally, he had had it many times since then. But he then asked himself the question, why am I so afraid of that pleasure, that sukha, that is accompanied and is the hallmark of first jhana? And then he says, there is no reason to be afraid of it, that I've been lied to. And so he says, by golly, it is that first jhana is the path to enlightenment. This is in Sutta number 36. And so when you put that point of 36 with this other stuff that we're finding in Sutta number 2, Sutta number 24, and Sutta number 48, all this stuff fits together, that it's this first jhana that is the path. And that getting ourselves into first jhana is a little bit of work. But then after we do that, we keep doing it over and over and over and over again until it becomes our normal method of operation. And that's basically all there is to the path. And if you get yourself to the point that now you've got loads and loads of time on your hand and nothing else to do, and you've already gotten the value of the Dhamma, now is the time to play with the higher jhanas. It's sort of a what do we do now kind of thing. That it's not that you have to go through jhana 1, 2, 3, and 4 and then become enlightened. No, you do first jhana, you become enlightened, and then you do 2, 3, and 4. Does that make any sense to you?
I think so, because from the craving to want an experience or a new or fresh experience from jhana, the second, the third, and fourth jhana, that can be investigated during the first jhana because it comes accompanied with investigation, right?
Exactly so. And in fact, you're touching on something that's worth talking about someday in the future. And that would be what we would call the Vipassana jhanas. Is that by understanding completely through the first jhana what Paticca Samuppada is all about and how it relates to the 4 jhanas, we can actually begin to do the jhanas very easily, very quickly out of this first jhana that we've gotten such a good handle on.
The last time I read about Vipassana jhanas, I didn't understand a thing.
Well, let us just call it the Vipassana jhanas, or the very easy shorthand method into the higher jhanas. That if you do the Dhamma work first, then the jhanas are easy. But if you do it this classical traditional way, it takes years. And that's basically what that means is that the student has to figure his way through them all on his own. To where with the Paticca Samuppada as a roadmap, exactly what needs to be done is laid out right in front of us. And I'll talk about it that way. In fact, the phrase word is when the seen is merely the seen and the heard is merely the heard. But we'll talk about what that means at a later time. In other words, when the seen is merely the seen, then it remains colors, shapes, textures, movement, forms.
Would that be just seeing things or experiencing things at the stage of contact?
Precise. Well, it depends upon how we use the word contact. But basically, what I'm getting at is that in normal life there is a normal way of looking at things that is already processed. For instance, when the scene is merely the scene, then we don't even have the word tree. We just see the shape and the form of that object, that we've had to process it enough to get the word tree out of it. The word tree is like we're naming it. Okay, so naming things is the nama rupa. When it's rupa only, then that means it's just the scene. It's just the form. But when we name it, that takes processing. Okay.
That's sorry. That's my understanding of the Zen meditation and the Vipassana meditation, but really it's just Satipatthana.
Right. And it's actually the introduction into the fourth jhana. Is when the scene is merely the scene, it's not processed. So we can make the mind so still that it's not even processing data. It's just taking data in. But we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Right now, you've got a whole lot of joy to fiddle with. All right.
Okay.
So we'll see you in a couple of days, unless you've got any new questions.
Okay, I'll see you then.
All righty.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.